Where do you set the ideal racing game? With a genre as storied and diverse as this, is it even possible to answer that very question with a single setting? Fortunately, the industry as of late has seemingly come up with it themselves: racing festivals. The beauty of this theme for most creatives is the freedom that comes alongside. You could theme a festival across a vast open world, segmented into portions of your game world, or even lock things into closed tracks. It's been well over a decade and a half since the first festival racers started to hit the market, popularized by titans such as Need for Speed and Forza, and throughout this explorative phase of the genre, predominantly towards modern day, questions have started to rise. What is it that makes a good festival? What made this archetype so popular in the first place? And why is it that the current plethora of offerings, while bigger than ever before, has started to feel stale? I decided, in order to answer this very question, to travel back to the origins, the genesis of this now iconic racing ideology, to a game that I've never played before: Need for Speed Prostreet. What is it that made festival racers hit the ground running, and can we look to the past for inspiration in bettering the future? Today, let's answer that very question and dive deep into Prostreet. The golden age for Need for Speed was magnificent. By 2007, EA and Black Box Studios had claimed their well-fought seat upon the racing game greats through varied and titanic titles such as Hot Pursuit 2, The Underground duology, and of course, Most Wanted and its sequel Carbon. The question comes after such irrevocable success: what do you do next? It was becoming clear through both critics and fans alike that the street racing style was approaching its creative limits, and in order to truly capture this genre's attention again, EA would need to do something truly new. The initial teaser for EA's all-new Need for Speed was exactly that. There was no underground or Most Wanted DNA evident. We were looking at something the likes of which hadn't been seen before. This would be the first Need for Speed developed for the next generation of consoles, with its predecessors still at their core being late 6th generation titles, and this meant nothing but great things under the hood of the all-new game. As the marketing train was pushing full steam ahead, the scope of what we'd come to know as Need for Speed Prostreet was soon unveiled. Gone were the interactive and engaging open worlds of its brothers, and in was a fully locked-in, stage-select style setting similar to that of the series' origins, though of course with vastly different presentation and structure. These tracks were no longer modeled over our fantasized versions of real-life vistas, but instead a much grittier, realistic style modeled after racing events. None of this was set up to the imagination either. To properly capture the feel of a racing festival, the development team went out to watch and take heavy notes of Formula Drift events. All of this to inspire the theme in which Prostreet would be structured upon. What exactly did all of this research and inspiration culminate in?
It's kind of like a festival. So in order to do that, we created these amazing, cool inflatables. We've got crowds of people. We've got cool graphics on the ground, DJs in the race hubs, music from Junkie XL. It's like street racers and the fans bring the party to organized track racing. That's the vibe that we're after.
Well, mission accomplished. How hard the vibes of certain games hit is often just throwing around buzzwords for nostalgia bait. But in the case of Prostreet, there was no small detail spared in order to create and hone in those incredible race day vibes that the team wanted. From going to real drift and drag events, the importance of having in-depth volumetric smoke effects was undeniably important. So the time was spent creating a brand new technology just to make smoke cloud the camera and race arenas in burnt rubber. And for drag races, a special feature was grabs smoke and dispels it throughout the wheel well. This is all new technology that the 7th generation allowed, and it's why racing games from this era felt like such a colossal shift. The wow factor of Prostreet's new engine tech kept on giving. The element of danger and grit needed to come across to the player, and on a visual front, the best way to showcase this was through your car's damage. Black Box's new implementation of what they called pixel damage and pixel shaders would allow for scratch maps, a new way to dynamically damage your ride's paint finish, but most prominently, crumple maps. Your car has crumple zones which, as the name suggests, crumples the metal of your bumpers and chassis in real time. Not only are these car models brilliant looking when shiny and perfect, but when broken, it's hard not to marvel at the details not spared underneath the hood and skeleton. The development team's journey outside of the studio still wasn't over, as they spent arguably the most valuable time developing an entirely new physics engine for Prostreet. This new engine was modeled directly from data provided by Porsche, as the crew spent some time at the famous Leipzig test track, studying how the cars behaved under pressure and the demands of track driving, and calibrating a physics engine which would both incorporate incorporate the lessons learned through the Porsche engineers, and the accessible nature the Need for Speed series was known for. The main improvement over the previous games in the series being the prominence of oversteer versus understeer, an element which was toned down for the more arcade style its siblings exemplified. With this new tone in check, Prostreet would be unleashed into the hands of many an eager fan in 2007, and on release, oh boy. The ball seemed to be in EA's court, so what happened? Well, the game sold very well. The critical reception was conflicted, to say the least. The combination of gritty, locked-in simulation style with arcade qualities left many people more confused than impressed, certainly not hitting the ground running like EA would have hoped. However, it isn't 2007 anymore. The racing game landscape is very different to how it was when Prostreet released. So what is Prostreet to someone like me in 2024? Well, let's dive right on in, shall we? Hosting the next generation of Need for Speed's cars is a massive responsibility. After all, the heart and soul that goes into these four-wheeled masterpieces is the driving force behind why Need for Speed is so loved in the first place. So how'd they do? For better or for worse, it's undeniable that Prostreet handles cars very differently to how the series had ever been beforehand. And without a doubt, innovation was at the forefront of the development process. I mentioned just now how much effort that was put into the physics and damage models, but how does that actually translate into gameplay? The physics themselves have been historically laden with controversy. With them being a hybrid of arcade and realistic physics, it tends to be quite polarizing. Most people either love it or hate it. And if you ask me, I'm somehow in the middle. Do I like the concept? Yeah, actually, I do. Realistic arcade may seem like an oxymoron, but when executed well, it's a properly fun way to experience a driving game. I'd say about 80% of the time. I think Prostreet's physics are pretty solid. They're nothing to write home about, but provide a satisfying groove in which you have to practice and learn the quirks in order to feel truly comfortable. This is definitely a welcome change and adds in an element of skill and learning a new playstyle, which I always encourage. But there's that final 20% of my personal time with Prostreet, where it can be just straight up jank. Don't get me wrong, I love a little risk in my racing games, but there's times during speed events where the tiniest tap of the analog stick gets you freakier than me on a Tuesday evening. It's one of those things that I can't say is entirely intentional, but gives you that immense satisfaction when you confidently pull off a radical top speed run and master that jank to come out on top. Outside of the 20% jank, you really can feel the approach that Black Box took toward making you feel how understeer and oversteer could change how you push your car. From the get-go and in my first race, I really wasn't sold towards this physics model. I felt it unresponsive and lacking in solid feel. But as time passed and I spent more time experiencing different cars with engine layouts and drivetrain configurations, it without a doubt is an engine that grows on you. And that's something I appreciate. These are video games at the end of the day, and feeling growth and accomplishment through practice and self-improvement is very crucial to the experience, especially one that targets a more realistic crowd. There is one critique I do have on the physics engine though, and it's likely done to improve accessibility, and that is the input delay. Just a tad bit more sensitivity would properly liven up the racing experience if you're asking me, but that's a hard ask with the variation in car classes on offer here. Physics were just one half of the team's big focus on Prostreet's vehicles, but what really tie into Prostreet's core DNA is damage. I've mentioned already the efforts that Black Box went to in order to incorporate real-time dynamic scratch and crumple maps, which on their own are impressive considering the much higher fidelity of a next-generation title. Yet it's how this damage was married alongside this new risk-reward physics engine that gives Prostreet its signature and infamous playstyle. Damage is critical to how do you mentally approach Prostreet. Just like in a real track event, while winning is priority, making sure that your car gets to the end in one piece is invaluable. Your car has 4 statuses: fixed, light damage, heavy damage, and you're going to become very familiar with all of them. The difference between fixed and light damage is so much as brushing another car's bumper or wall. Think of it as the game giving you a first strike. Light to heavy damage starts to very lightly affect the performance of your car, though not heavily enough to where you necessarily feel much slower. What you will feel though is the pressure, as this acts as strike 2. You make one more slip up, you're done. Both damages statuses make sure to mentally instill that element of fear to keep you cautious of getting too frisky with the steering wheel. This isn't as if it has zero consequence either, as damaging your car even with light damage will constantly throw up pop-ups until you repair it, which either cost repair markers you'll earn throughout your playtime or good old-fashioned cash, which especially at the start of your career is very, hard to come by. It's undeniable that both the physics engine and damage model lean very heavily into Prostreet's next-generation DNA, and gave reverence to why Prostreet's rides have such a cult following within their strong focus on risk versus reward. But what about the cars themselves? This list is not only, I believe, the largest in the series at the time, but by a country mile the most diverse. The best of Japanese tuner legend alongside Bugatti and Koenigsegg, with a healthy serving of American muscle both new and old alongside, taking great inspiration from Carbon in this element. It's not just the big boys either. I absolutely commend the appreciation of multiple trim levels, both the DC4 and DC2 Integras, Golf GTI alongside R32. Black Box, once again, understood what the players who brought Prostreet would want, to allow the fantasy of building a demonic track weapon out of a Civic CX or 240SX. And build you sure can. It's undeniable Prostreet has one of the most involved upgrade systems in the series history, allowing you, of course, the series staples such as choosing between multi-tiered parts, but with a much more expanded version of Carbon's tuning, now becoming a whole subsection of your upgrade menu. Tuning gives you that fine-toothed comb, letting you brush out all of the little quirks and troubles of how your car behaves. It's no simulator, but it's just enough of the style of the game that we're playing. Tuning isn't the only Carbon feature which had been expanded on. Autosculpt returns, even better than ever before, now no longer just a stylistic way to personalize your cars, but having a functional element wherein tuning wings a specific way can increase or decrease your downforce. This isn't the largest trump card of Prostreet. This, of course, is handed over to the blueprint system. Each car in the game can be designated to one of 4 different classes: race, drag, drift, and speed, and then the 3 separate presets for each class. I'll dive into the intricacies of each one during the career run-through, but the importance here comes from the different philosophy to that of yesteryear's Need for Speeds. The games before this prioritized honing one car at a time until you traded up, but now you've got the task of managing multiple at once, all for different tasks. I can't say that this is a poor approach, but you do absolutely miss that very personal approach that you would have to a single car in the past, as every car that you make has to be a one-trick pony. It's a trade-off for sure. You lose a lot of that personal connection in favor of absolutely nailing the experience of a single discipline. And for one-trick ponies, they're pretty damn unique. The last thing I have to mention in the realm of your garage here in Prostreet is the quality. Each of the disciplines on offer here has unique parts. The models are very high in graphical fidelity for the era, but more impressive than anything is the audio design. The recording process for the car sound was a multi-month long process, including recording individual engine notes, ripping the mufflers off cars just to get them loud enough, real turbocharger spools, dramatic tire squeals by fitting the loudest tires they could possible, but most emphatically, crashes. Yes, they dropped cars from cranes and experimented with different ways of hitting metal in the studio. Goddamn lunatics. And of course, they probably spent just as much time polishing and perfecting all of these with special effects. There's even stupendous spatial audio tech, including driving close to walls or through tunnels, making those sounds even more lifelike. The end result of all of this labor? Well, I'll let the game speak for itself. Audio is a realm of its own. Visuals are great and all, but to fully immerse yourself in the game world, you need as many senses as possible working together in harmony to make you feel as if you're attacking the track. And on that front, Prostreet has aged magnificently. Undoubtedly, one of Need for Speed's most characteristic traits has to be their campy but ever so endearing stories. Leading up to Prostreet, the question was sure to be raised in just how Black Box would write a story to take advantage of this all-new setting and thematic skeleton. The answer, well, if you ask me, it's very two-sided. There are so many things that Prostreet's story and campaign truly excel at, but on the other hand, some genuine flaws which dampen the ability for me to truly call it great. So let's dive on in at the start and allow me to divulge just what I mean. We open up our campaign in the most fitting mood possible. The top street racers from all over the country have been picked and summoned to participate in Battle Machines, an organized group which hosts legal racing competition on both street circuits and dedicated racetracks. What's at the forefront of our attention is the immediate presence and intimidation of the festival. We are, after all, just a rookie, entering the big bad world of an all-new racing territory. Yet, at the same time, it's inviting, with the exuberant party atmosphere live DJs blasting music, announcers hyping up the crowd and racers alike. Those vibes I mentioned before are pumping through in magnificent fashion. To get us hyped and allow the competition to blossom, the universe's famous Ryo Watanabe, master showman and clear big dog, and wait, how is he hanging out of his car yet still doing donuts? Or his legs as long as a stork? Brother must have heard me call him out as he points us, little old Ryan Cooper, out with a direct call out, calling us a lower standard than back in his day. Well, challenge accepted. We shut him up by going through our first race, and he still talks smack by saying we don't even look half comfortable behind the wheel. This cheesy rivalry sure won't get any more. Oh, you really showed him there, Buster. And as Ryo leaves us in a cloud of smoke, our newfound goal is in check. Take down Ryo Watanabe. The path to Ryo is sure to be nothing but long and arduous, with a fierce number of racers to surmount before reaching the ultimate showdown king. And on a narrative front, here's where some of my nitpicks come into play. This great, albeit cheesy setup between Cooper and Ryo has just played out. Yet not only does Ryo practically sideline himself for the rest of the game, but the rest of your opponents are characterless names. You'll occasionally get hints of Ryo as you hit through super promotion events. But again, there's no mini-bosses or smaller scale rivalries to tide you over such as in Most Wanted or Carbon. All of these smaller rivalries which do exist in Prostreet are right near the end as you're about to face Ryo, which just seems so peculiar to me. On all fronts, it would have made far more sense if you try to drop these aforementioned mini-bosses at the super promotion checkpoints, so you always have something to look forward to as each approaches. Anywho, now that the foundation for our story has been set, Prostreet lets you loose to experience what it's absolutely most proud of, its gameplay. The career in Prostreet is structured on a very by-the-book linear structure. You'll be visiting race days one by one in an effort to build yourself enough credit to unlock a super promotion event, which will then unlock a new tier of race days in before the next super promotion. Rinse and repeat. Your first race day may be rudimentary, but it does a great job of welcoming you to Prostreet's gameplay and immersing you in the atmosphere. The second that you arrive, the announcer has always got something to say about you or the car that you're driving. Hell, even has voice dialogue for every single car in the game. Just as I said before, man, there was no cent spared on budgeting for the most immersive and personal atmosphere possible. Race days typically have at least 2 event types to choose from. At the start of the game, you'll be sticking to 2 beginner classes, race and drag. Race class events are for the most part exactly as you would expect structurally, but I truly appreciate that Prostreet decided to include things such as time trials and these fun new sector shootout events to help prevent the standard race type from getting stale. There's a good balance throughout the game which lets race take a predominant role at the start of the game to really push you to learn the new handling model, and then slowly tapering off toward the latter half of the game, allowing for a larger focus on the more extreme event styles. The second class of racing Prostreet welcomes you into is drag. When I want drag races in a racing game, this is what I'm talking about. Prostreet's drag racing is so great it could have worked as a game on its own, and it's because nothing is shared with race in the slightest. The cars built for drag class come with skinny front tires which can't corner. The body kits are now melded in order to fit fatter tires in the back of the car, and this is all just visual. When you're in the thick of it, having to heat up your tires to the perfect temperature, nailing a perfect start, and getting your shifts absolutely spot on, just to get a single-digit time is immensely satisfying. You have to commit to drag racing. If you make the slightest short shift, you will bog down and lose immeasurable time. If you get a poor launch, your run is shot. If you blow your engine over revving, you're out. I'd honestly have to name drag as my favorite discipline. The progression of speed from early to end game, the intensity of the races themselves, is nothing but an absolute blast. The next class to tackle is drift, and if you ask me, there isn't much to say about it. Getting drift events right is tricky, as anyone who knows basic car control can trivialize them in most any game, and that's what gets to Prostreet here. Now sure, I admit, the physics in drift are wonky as sin, and will certainly take some time to get used to, but once that initial hurdle is over, there really isn't that much to write home about here. The events are nothing like race in where there's variation in how you use your drift cars. It's all the very same. Hit the highest score of points in a certain section of track until you win. Now is that bad? No, far from it. But there's nothing that drives me to get excited for a drift event. And hell, you barely even have to upgrade your cars for this one. I kept the same GTO without upgrades from the start up until the very end game. Definitely a missed opportunity for creativity. The final class of car to go over is speed. Speed class cars are well and truly that very word to a T. All of the cars in this class are built for one thing, and that's to hit and maintain an unimaginable speed for an extended period of time. That and absolutely terrifying you. Without a doubt, the thing that strikes you the most about speed class racing is just how well done this sense of speed is. Prostreet does an excellent job of making slow cars feel slow, and then making the fastest cars in the game feel like cruise missiles. Speed class is when you really feel in the late game. The events are by far the most challenging in the game. The physics are very sensitive, and your room for error is quite literally non-existent. The famous speed trap style of event returns alongside the ability to just simply race like normal. But of course, as should be clear by now, there is absolutely nothing normal about how these races feel. Alright, so we've been over the gist of how Prostreet's campaign functions and what you'll be partaking in. And while there are some fantastic ideas and a ton of brilliant game here, I found myself really struggling to push through the campaign at certain spots. It's not as much a case of components being bad, but instead there not being enough to really take you away from that raw gameplay back to back. This could have been through my aforementioned idea of mini-bosses, through goofy character cutscenes, just as a way to add a little break of character, just anything to keep yourself engaged in the world outside of when you're just racing. I'd say all of this really started to compound around the 60 to 70% mark, when aspects of this game that I really do love just started to overstay their welcome. To liven my spirits though, the final showdown with Rio was a proper bit of good old rivalry. And yeah, it damn better be after the long road it took to get there. This is a proper test of every single niche and class of car that you've been using to get through your journey. And as a swan song then, to close Prostreet's journey out on, it's undeniably awesome. The added difficulty really helps get these competition juices flowing. And it's also hilarious to me to see Rio occasionally just absolutely murder himself in the Nevada speed races. Rio's smug face left with nothing but a sorrowful frown as we rightfully claim both his crown on top of the festival and his beloved Evo. The faceless wonder, Ryan Cooper, has become the champion of the battle machines, and this story comes to a close. You know, this is a really hard one to rate, as there really is so much that I adore here. This premise is brilliant. The setup is even better, but I just can't help but yearn for more of an actual narrative here. And considering the series' history beforehand, that should have been in steep consideration. Nonetheless, with the heavy focus on gameplay, there still remains that strong wish for just restructuring and organizing this career in a more even fashion, rather than being so back-end heavy. All of this being said, I've been quite critical, and that's all because I can properly adore the foundations which make up Prostreet. And honestly, if there was a desire to redo this festival style that Prostreet first envisioned in a future Need for Speed, I'm all for it. It's time to bring in the opening question of this video. What was it that made Prostreet so influential, and what can we learn from it in order to better the genre's future? My response to that is simple. It's passion. Listening to the developers talk about their time at Formula D, watching a creative vision come to life through the volition of the team behind it, and not simply trying to copy what's best for a company's wallet, that's what made the founding fathers of this archetype hit so hard. Tech specs are cool and all, but how often am I thinking about just how many cars I own in Horizon 5? How closely am I inspecting the ferns and grass in the Crew Motorfest? I'm not, because that isn't what matters to me. I want to be transported into a world of racing, where the competition is fierce and the atmosphere is fiercer. Festivals have become the safe bet, both thematically and literally, removing the element of risk, competition, and danger, which makes racing so interesting in the first place. As for Prostreet on its own then, is it perfect? No. But that's not a bad thing. Innovation means taking risks, trying new things, and you will almost never get everything perfect on your first time constructing a wildly different game. What's made Prostreet a cult classic, and what's catapulted its reputation in recent years, is in fact that soul behind it. A soul is timeless, and it keeps a game charming no matter how old that it gets. And that right there is what this archetype needs to find again.